The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals just offered conservatives and libertarians a victory. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. A few prerequisites. First, government so-called bans don't stop demand. They fuel a criminal black market. Second, the U.S. Constitution not only doesn't give the feds any power to ban anything, the Second Amendment strictly forbids any level of government from infringing on the right to keep and bear arms. Third, all judges on all levels swear oaths to protect and defend the U.S. Constitution, such that if they encounter a statute alien to the precepts of that document, they're duty-bound and sworn to oppose it, lest they too become domestic enemies of the very so-called rule book that allowed previous generations to create their seats as judges. Fourth, even if the Constitution were amended to allow the feds or any lower-level political units to ban something like a bump stock, such aggressive threats against people who peacefully own a piece of hardware would be absolutely immoral. Which brings us to the big development from the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. On January 6th, the banc empaneled 16-member court released its majority 13-3 decision in the highly anticipated case of Cargill v. Garland, Dettlebach, ATF. And the ruling is a big win for constitutionalists and gun rights proponents. Or is it? The disputants and judges in this legal wrestling match focused on whether the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, and enjoy looking for that in the U.S. Constitution. The wrestling match was focused on whether or not the ATF and its members were sanctioned to define bump stocks as machine guns, and as a result, were able to claim the power to regulate or completely ban them based on the already standing 1934 National Firearms Act and the 1968 Gun Control Act, as well as the 1986 Firearm Owners Protection Act. Wink, wink. It wasn't protection at all, but an attack on the right to keep and bear arms. Well, the ATF imposed their so-called rule defining bump stocks, and remember, rule really is a threat to people, defining bump stocks as machine guns in March of 2019. As bureaucrats often do in order to ban the bump stock, the ATF under Trump and under Biden has expended incredible energy to pretend that something isn't what it actually is. It's an accessory. And of course, as we often see on every level of the blindingly obsequious judicial branch in the U.S., though the majority of the Fifth Circuit en banc panel ruled against the ATF calling bump stocks machine guns, they didn't pay heed to the core violation of the existence of the ATF in the first place. And they didn't bother to note that no level of government has any so-called power to infringe on the purchase of a gun part or accessory or a gun, even if this were a gun. Instead, they embraced normalcy bias, accepting the established gun control acts, and of course, merely arguing the finer points of whether a federal agency like the ATF has the power to define bump stocks as machine guns without Congress passing a statute defining them as machine guns, and of course, making those previous statutes going back to 1934 magically apply. It's very easy, right? In other words, we can ask the majority on the Fifth Circuit, hey guys, if Congress, rather than this federal ATF bureaucracy, if Congress takes the reality-avoiding leap of defining a gun accessory as a gun, well then, does that somehow make it perfectly fine to tell people that they can't own such a thing? Does that make it okay for the feds to use my neighbor's tax cash? For the feds to then ready the government guns within the ATF and tell peaceful people that they'd better turn over the accessory, which is now, of course, defined as a gun by Congress in this hypothetical? And if Congress were to define them as guns, then wouldn't the Second Amendment come into play and apply even more protection for the citizen? As I noted, the Fifth Circuit majority focused on the surface, the devilish details, you might say, not the devil behind it all. And that devil is the idea that Congress can do anything to stop people from obtaining guns or gun parts. Many conservatives are calling this a victory. Wrote the majority, quote, Cargill, and he is the plaintiff and Texas resident Michael Cargill, is correct. A plain reading of the statutory language, paired with close consideration of the mechanics of a semi-automatic firearm, reveals that a bump stock is excluded from the technical definition of machine gun. No kidding. Set forth in the Gun Control Act and National Firearms Act. But even if that conclusion were incorrect, the rule of lenity would still require us to interpret the statute against imposing criminal liability. And what do the judges mean by rule of lenity? Well, that's tied to what's known in legal parlance as the Chevron decision and goes back in name, at least, to 1984 in a case called Chevron USA Incorporated v. Natural Resources Legal Defense Counsel Incorporated. Now, according to this tradition, judicial deference is given to administrative actions if the court members believe said administrative actions are consistent with the spirit of the statutes and terms creating that administrative unit and the possible power the Congress might have envisioned for that bureau. In other words, the judges can and will overlook the immoral, unconstitutional existence of an agency, and they even will accept additional insults to the Constitution and basic ethics if the new so-called power that the agency claims seems to be kind of close to what the Congress wanted when it wrote legislation, creating the probably unconstitutional agency or that field of regulation in the first place. The Fifth Circuit majority notes that they're much stricter about bureaus adhering to the original intent of Congress when the penalty for the newly invented executive agency created transgression is going to put the accused on a felony level. Quote, a rich legal tradition supports the well-known rule that penal laws are to be construed strictly, end quote. But the Fifth Circuit Court majority isn't strict in any way about what are supposed to supersede the bureaus, supersede the officers, the president, and the Congress. And that is supposed to be the U.S. Constitution. And even more basic than that, our never-changing, always extant natural rights. So, while some might feel a charge of satisfaction in seeing this federal appeals court ruling, and while some might view this as both a blow to the insufferable Biden administration and to Trump's egregious original attack in issuing the so-called bump stock ban, well, it's merely a Pyrrhic victory. It's a temporary and possibly transitory win that actually reaffirms the erroneous idea that if Congress wrote it in legislation, then it would be okay for the ATF to ban the bump stocks. Does anybody else see a big problem with that sort of thinking? Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Please like and subscribe. Find us on Rumble where they don't censor us. We'll see you in the comments section, also on YouTube. Double check that you're subscribed there. And we'll see you at MRC TV and, of course, all sorts of social media. You can check us out on TikTok, Instagram, Parler, and we will also see you at the Facebook MRC TV page. You can find me on Gab at Gardner Goldsmith and on Twitter as Gard Goldsmith. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.